Mm. Well, coffee ASMR to kick things off today. Hello, I'm Kate, and I am currently stuck inside because the air quality index is topping some charts yesterday and today. And I did go and teach a yoga class this morning. I teach the gym system here, and have a 6:30 a.m. class, and was surprised that there were actually people who showed up, despite how terrible the air is. I mean, when you step outside, it smells like straight bonfire. It's from all the wildfires, obviously, spreading the smoke down from Canada, and yeah, it sucks. But I, for the rest of the day, am not going to be leaving my apartment, which is kind of tough for me because I have a hard time sitting still for too long. I tend to get a little bit antsy. So, that being said, I decided that I would take this opportunity to talk about all of the best and worst books that I read in Q2 of this year so far. I recently did a video on Q1, and because it was I think my first or second video, um, I am a little bit behind in the year in giving all of such updates. Um, and so it is crazy to believe it's almost the end of July. But I'm going to be looking back uh, at April, May, and June. So I am not really big into tracking a lot of stats. Uh, this is the most I've ever really done looking back at the books that I've read is actually like writing them all out. I do track on Goodreads and Storygraph, um, just so I know, how many I read and kind of what the primary genres are. And um, yeah, so I think looking back, it looks like I read 37 books between April and June, which, I mean, I'm setting a lot of records for myself. I'm not historically someone who reads, over 100 books in a year, but in the last, year and a half, I've really started to just kind of dedicate a lot more time to reading and was using my commute into the office to really kind of catch up on some books. Sorry, I'm just having a hard time getting settled here. But yeah, so I'm going to go through starting in no particular order. This is going to be kind of a rambling video where I talk a little bit about what I remember because a lot of these honestly were kind of long ago, especially in April. So let's start. I think we can go from the worst, and then there are a couple in each month where I was just kind of neutral on them, and then get into some of the best of that month, and we'll go through all 3 months. So starting with the worst, and this one is a real bummer to me because I've seen a lot of people whose tastes I share talk about how much they enjoy this book, and that was Tradwife by Saratoga Schaefer. And that one is a horror thriller-ish kind of novel about a woman who is an influencer and is living this very domestic lifestyle, but all she's missing is a baby. And so she makes a deal with a creature of sorts, and ends up making some sacrifices in order to get what she wants. And get that she does. And it very much takes kind of an unexpected turn. There's some themes around consent and relationships and domesticity and the role of women in the household. And it's not that I thought it was a bad book. I just, for people who know me personally, I went through a phase maybe a year and a half ago, if not longer, where I was really interested in the idea of the trad wife. And so it's interesting now to see so many fiction novels come out focusing on tradwifery, if you will. And I thought it was fine. I think it's not that I thought it was bad. I just wasn't nearly as engaged or horrified as I think the subject matter might imply. Um, I think it's almost more kind of falling into the horror comedy camp for me because some of the plot lines are so absurd. And I mean, especially there are some scenes around sex and intimacy that I mean, I think are apt and um, can be understood as a really strong commentary on like the sex lives of long married, heterosexual couples. Not all the time, obviously, but the kind of stereotypes around that. And I mean, I think that that kind of lifestyle, the track of, maybe you do or don't go to college, and then, in your early 20s, you get married right away, and then you start having babies, is something that, for me personally, has always been nerve wracking. It's just like never something I've had a calling to do. Um, and I think that there are a lot of pitfalls for those whom believe that that track comes with these promises of fulfillment, and where that lifestyle can fall short. So I think that this was an interesting look into that. But again, I listened to the audiobook and I just was not, I don't know. I I thought the writing was just okay. I think I'm very picky when it comes to the actual prose of the horror that I read. Growing up, I read a lot of Stephen King, and he has, you know, people have complicated feelings about him. Understandable, not saying anything about that, but his prose itself is like he has these kind of like absurd observations sometimes about like body parts and ball sacks and stuff like that, just like really off the wall. But he also has a lot of lyricism and poeticism at points. um you think about, I think it's the opening of The Body. He writes, the most important things are the hardest to say, and that's a quote that they end up using also in a movie because it's just so poignant. But yeah, I mean, I think for my horror, because I come from such like a literary lit fic background, that is kind of what I'm looking for. Like, let's say if like the Reformatory by Tanana do, I think did a really good job of blending horror with really kind of poetic writing. So that's my kind of taste in horror, just for some context, and why maybe Trap Wife didn't exactly land for me. And same with just one that kind of comes down to taste, personal preference. It was Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. And this is kind of like a religious plague ridden story, set centuries back. There's a man who kind of stumbles upon an orphaned young girl, and protects her from being abused by some of his male cohorts who he's been surviving with. And they end up kind of embarking on this journey to grapple with good and evil. They encounter a priest and all sorts of trials and tribulations. And I think that there's a lot there. However, for me, um, I think the religious aspect is always tough. I mean, like, and especially also like the plague setting. It's an area of history that I just personally, it's interesting, and there's a lot of tragedy and darkness there, but I think it's hard for me to find connective points. And then also, from like the religiosity perspective, I was technically raised Lutheran, but I don't know much about. I couldn't tell you which stories allude to the Bible, which is, as an aside, I think that, as someone who majored in English, that is a little bit of a gap in the English kind of programming, because I think that there are so many allusions to biblical stories, but Bible as literature was not a requirement of the major. But anyway, yeah. So I think books like that sometimes can be tough for me. Same with Bone of My Bone by Joanna Van Veen, where it's like I just don't think that I'm the right audience for it, if that makes sense, because a lot of it's going to go over my head. Um, and I wouldn't call myself a moral relativist, but I do think that I tend to like stories of good and evil and descending into hell. They just don't resonate with me in the way that it does with some, or they do with some. So, anyway, that was my experience with that. Um, and then next up, now this one, I'm going to try to keep my thoughts short and sweet. Um, that is Adult Braces by Lindy West. And she's the author, of Shrill fame, who wrote the memoir and then uh, helped create the TV series based on her book and her life experiences as a fat woman and in dating and love and relationships. Um, and I remember I had read Shrill, years back. I had been struggling with my own relationship with food, and so was seeking out a lot of guidance in, almost dropped my microphone, um, other people's experiences. And so that was kind of how I stumbled upon her. But I didn't really have a strong memory of her writing outside of that. So when this came out, I was really intrigued. I saw some of the controversy surrounding it, given, the context of basically at the end of Shrill, she and her now husband get back together after a breakup, and the loss of her father, and then decide to get married. And then it later is revealed that he is a strong proponent of polyamory, and they kind of, it would be a generous interpretation to say that they negotiate a new style of relationship. And I think, I personally have not practiced polyamory. I've read a little bit about it. There was another memoir that came out a couple years ago, um, that was about it. But I just, I think, she had become so public about self love and embracing yourself and accepting that you can be loved as you are in the body that you have. But it just felt like in her newest memoir, she's really still grappling with a lot of internalized feelings of self hate, and I think she's open about that. But I just wonder. And then there's also like the whole controversy where I forget the journalist's name, Sachi Cole, reached out to her husband for comment, and um, or didn't rather, but he, after an article that Cole had written about her experience, Lindy West's, the husband reached out and basically just said that she was untalented and a terrible person, and um, how dare you, whatever, just like writing with absolute vitriol. Just a bad look. It just gives me the ick. It's not the vibe that I want in 2026 and beyond. I mean, I think that that level of just hatred and anger, I don't know. I mean, I hope they're doing well. I hope their little trio is happy. I hope Lindy is as happy as she is claiming she is. But yeah, I mean, memoirs are always hard because it's someone's real experience. So that is all I'll say about that. And then moving on, I read Flesh by, I forget the author's name. Obviously, this is a very, not the most researched video, but it had won some awards and had gained a lot of acclaim in the literary community. And it follows a boy and a lot of his experiences sexually, as well as different relationships throughout his life. Um, and it documents kind of grief and loss and um, war. At some point, he becomes a soldier. This one, there's some heavy themes for sure, but I feel like I would put it kind of in the camp of like it's written by a dude for dudes, and maybe that's unfair. but the writing style is just very cut and dry, very this is what was happening. Like he's describing these sexual interactions with a woman, I think it's like mom's age when he's, you know, quite young. Um, and he's describing how much he hates or almost like reviles her body, but is still simultaneously aroused by it. And I just, though I think different sexual experiences and especially in adolescence are worth looking at and exploring. I don't know if this was quite the approach I would have taken. I don't know. I think maybe it's just it was really hard to connect with the character because there wasn't a lot of emotion. I listened to the audiobook, maybe it would have been, I mean, honestly, if I was reading the physical copy, I probably would have DNF'd it. Um, so yeah, that was my experience with that. And then, okay, hello. I am back. It is a couple days later because I realized that my microphone died. And so my audio cut out while I was in the middle of talking about April, which the silver lining, I'll take this, is my April section was getting a little bit too long. So we're gonna move through the rest of the worst books that I read, and then some middle of the road ones, and then some of the best. So it cut off right as I was talking about What Hunger by Catherine Dang, which is a new horror release, which follows a girl who is, I think, just getting into high school. So it's a coming of age. She's the child of immigrant parents. Her parents are very kind of cagey about their past in Vietnam, and it's about like her relationship with her parents, her relationship with her brother, who ultimately ends up passing away, and then a traumatic incident that happens in like her early high school. And I think that I can see what this writer was trying to do as far as like using hunger and satiety as a metaphor for these traumatic experiences, what trauma takes from you, and how we respond to generational trauma as well, and the ways especially women are unable to fully express the full range of their emotions. But I just, unfortunately, I think, find hunger in this context to be a little bit of a tired avenue. Like the kind of grotesque moments later on in the novel felt a little bit, not forced, but it just, like it felt like it was written to be shocking as opposed to, oh, this is the most natural expression of this grief and this pain. And so I also really just like was not really jiving with the writing style. So unfortunately, this one made it on my worst list. And then next is similar to, in theme, to one of our earlier worst, which was Tradwife. And that is Yesteryear by Carol Claire Burke. And I've seen really mixed reviews on this. Some people are just saying, you know, it kept me on my toes and I had a fun time. Some people are saying, like, rightfully critiquing the characterization of the main character and religion, and also people who live traditional quote-unquote lifestyles. I think for me, I thought the writing, you know, it kept me hooked. I was definitely engrossed. I wanted to see what was going to happen. But unfortunately, I think the way that everything ends up playing out in the end fell super flat for me. And there are also some elements that that read as potholes to me personally that took away from my experience. And there's someone named Siobhan, I just found it, but Siobhan Breyer Aguilar here on YouTube has a great video about Yesteryear, and like also kind of like the state of the publishing industry, wherein Burke presented this idea, publishers immediately jumped on it because of the buzziness of the topic, and everything was kind of shuffled through, and that state of publishing, the expediency of it, can really be to the detriment of novels and novelists. I think it's clear that Burke is talented. I think that she has some interesting thoughts, but I think that this is a book and a story that would have benefited from a little bit of further development. Sorry, a timer just went off, of course, in the middle of my rant about Yesteryear. But I think given my interest in the topic itself, it fell a little flat insofar as like it did, I think, what she set out to do. It operated very much as a critique of the lifestyle, but also showing various paths that lead someone there. But yeah, I don't know. It's certainly not, I wouldn't say it's bad. I just think that it wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, especially based on the marketing. As an aside, I know that Anne Hathaway, I think, bought the rights to it, which she is not who I picture playing the main character. I think that that's a little bit of a mistake. Obviously, there are parallels to Ballerina Farms, and this kind of waif-like blonde figure in a prairie dress is much more what I visualized. So if that is who ends up playing her, I don't know if I'll be watching. And then next and last for the worst list is Spread Me by Sarah Gailey, and I heard about this one because there's some people who I've seen say they really enjoyed it despite kind of the strangeness of it. It's essentially about a woman who finds herself attracted to a virus, and it's a team of researchers in a remote area that start to interact with this virus, and then kind of one by one are affected by it. And I saw some people say that, you know, some of the characters, I think one of them is maybe Domino or something like that, are just like really attractive in their characterization. It didn't resonate with me. I thought that the dialogue was pretty cringy. I think generally I do struggle with like, it's not even smut, but it's just like dirty talk maybe. And then also the narrator, because I listened to the audiobook, really gave me the ick. The narrator's voice was not doing it for me. But yeah, so that unfortunately did not make it onto my best. As far as a couple middle of the road, I'll speak about briefly. I read Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is about the history of the IRA in Ireland, and it talks a lot about the impacts and devastation of the violence and conflicts, and it was really fascinating. I mean, there's so much that I didn't know, so much depth there in the people and their lives and their stories, and I thought it was excellently done. I generally tend to struggle with nonfiction. I'm primarily a fiction reader, but his writing style is it's narrative for sure. It's like something that you can still connect emotionally with the people and the lives that are being depicted, and so I thought that was great. I'm considering it more middle of the road because it is quite dense, at least for me as a non-fiction reader. Yeah, so definitely recommend, especially if you're interested in that part of history. So I enjoyed that. And then another one is I read Nosferatu by Joe Hill, which is Stephen King's son. I would say I read this in April, kind of the wrong time of year to read it. There's a strong Christmas setting. And I mean, I thought it was engaging. Basically, yeah, I just thought it was fine. It does seem to take a lot of inspiration from King. As far as I'm concerned, the style felt similar. But yeah, so that was neither best nor worst. Same with Molka by Monica Kim, which is about, it's a very real phenomenon in Korea where there are these kind of covertly placed cameras that capture videos and images of people non-consensually. It can be in bathrooms or in people's bedrooms and private spaces. And so it follows both a man who engages in recording women without their knowledge and consent, and then a victim of a Molka scandal. I think the writing for me just personally didn't resonate. I think that the story is such an interesting and upsetting topic, and I just really wish that the writing had been maybe more to my taste, a little bit more in depth. I think it was much more plot driven as opposed to character or really getting down into the nitty gritty. So I mean, I thought it was good. I think that the topic's important. It just wasn't my favorite kind of writing. And then I have a couple books for the best list, and the first I'm excited to talk about is Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher, and it was the first book that I read by her. I found a signed copy at a bookstore in St. Louis when I was on vacation there, and it's about a woman who is like a scientific illustrator and takes a job at a remote home for this like kind of kooky scientist who studies bugs. And the previous illustrator is no longer around for potentially mysterious circumstances, and weird things start to happen. And I thought that the descriptions of the illustrations and the bugs and the wildlife were really striking and really engaging. And I really enjoyed her writing style. Yeah, so that was definitely a win for me. It was a bit of a slow read. There are moments that felt a little tedious, but in a way that I think paid off. I think it was worth it. So the book that I read, it was Odessa, which is based in Russia during the pogroms and attacks on Jewish communities there. And it's about a family who experiences a really tragic loss during a night of violence, and kind of the ethically ambiguous things that they do to right what has been taken from them, to get back. And I thought that it was very, like, the setting is so rich and complex, and really it's an upsetting story, kind of evocative, a little bit of Pet Sematary in some pretty direct ways, but it has its own spin as a different, it's an older child and family, different setting. But yeah, I was really moved by that, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it was written by, it's on my other bookshelf, Gabrielle Schur, so I'll have to keep an eye out for other books that she writes, because I really enjoyed it. And then next I read Void Verse, which is by Damien Lincoln Ober. And to be honest, I picked it up because the cover is sick. The cover is super cool. And this is a sci-fi novel about, it says, an endless void, a powerful anomaly, a quest for revenge. When the sinker was a child, her home was destroyed by the construct, a floating machine that consumes all in its path. To survive, she fled into the void, a seemingly infinite nothingness where few dare venture. So it just kind of follows these different people who are existing in this void, for lack of a better description. And it's discombobulating, it's strange, and it doesn't have the best reviews on Goodreads that I've seen, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought the world building was really interesting. Yeah, so that was that one. And then next I read Martyr, which got a lot of buzz and acclaim I think it was been like a year or two ago. But it's about a man whose mother dies tragically in a plane accident when he's a child. And then he moves to the US and struggles with drug addiction in his youth, becomes sober, and then later in his life is obsessed with this idea of martyrdom and telling stories of martyrs. So it's kind of his quest to grapple with his own history and his next creative pursuit. And I thought that the writing was really moving, and the story, like the angle, is really interesting. I think the idea of a martyr, there's just so much there, and there were a lot of references to martyrs throughout history. And then obviously the context of the plane crash was really moving. It was actually referencing a real plane crash, or bombing, I believe it was, but act of violence. So that was really wonderful. And then last for my best of April, my cat is being a menace, and that's Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, and that was a book. It's by Carly Lee Baker that I've been meaning to read for quite some time, and I picked it up, and it follows an Asian American during COVID, during times of violence against Asian Americans, and she's a crime scene cleaner and starts to notice a pattern in deaths. And I thought that the story was really compelling. I thought the writing was concise and incisive, and I thought that the story that she was telling was really interesting. I did at some point, I can't remember what I read, Japanese Gothic. Looks like in May, so the next month, because I liked Bat Eater so much. But I preferred Bat Eater over Japanese Gothic for sure, and I'll talk about that when I get to May. But yeah, those are the 15 books that I read in April, and I'm gonna pass you off to several days ago, me. Okay, I just had to go take a break and have some water and a snack. Because that first video alone was 30 minutes, and that only covers April. So now moving on into May, I read 12 books, and we'll go ahead and start with the ones in the worst category, which, hopefully it goes without saying, but that doesn't mean that they're bad books necessarily, just that they didn't work for me. So starting with a book called Made a Monster. I heard about it because I asked on TikTok for recommendations for extreme horror or splatterpunk, and this one was recommended to me, and also I was introduced to the author there, and it is essentially about how quote unquote monsters, whether they're made or born. So it's about trauma and abuse, and then how that then later manifests potentially into violence or further perpetuating some of the atrocities. And it is at its core a revenge story, and it's brutal. I have a video of me reading it, just kind of like squinting my eyes and leaning away. I think that the idea is interesting, the core message. However, the writing itself, unfortunately, wasn't quite for me. I fear that most splatterpunk and extreme horror books are going to kind of be in that same um, camp. But similarly, the next book that I read was The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, and that was also another one that I see recommended often on lists about like the most disturbing books that people have ever read. And it's inspired by a true story about a girl who gets kind of abducted and tortured by a community of children and one of their parents. And it is disturbing for sure. There are some content warnings to be aware of going in. And the story that inspired it is truly tragic. Uh, the book was a tough read. I feel like I just was something that extreme. It's hard to say that I liked it or that I didn't like it. The writer, I just feel all of it feels gross and just hard to really engage with in any real way other than just to feel sorrow and a lot of anger at the situation and what happened. So definitely, if you check that one out, be aware going in that it is tough. Um, and then moving on to another one that really didn't resonate with me, and that's culpability. And that one on paper seemed really interesting. It deals with themes of AI and how with AI, which is generated by humans, but then is kind of its own self-sustaining thing. Who's responsible uh, for the outcomes of AI? And so it's about a family who's in a car, and the son is driving, and they get into a car accident, and the couple in the other car is an older couple who tragically pass away. And in the wake of this, the family of four, no, I think it's five. There are three kids um, go to a cabin, go to like a lake house uh, to kind of distance themselves from everything that's been going on. And I think that the concept of it and the concept behind it is really interesting. It's a lot about like autonomous vehicles, texting and driving, family dynamics, etc. Um, but there were just some weird things where it's like, the police are investigating this crash and you decide to take a week long vacation. Like that part felt really weird. And then there's the husband, the father of the family, is complaining about how his wife is from a really wealthy family herself and is really highly regarded her in her field, and he feels oftentimes lesser than. And it just doesn't like the family is he's talking about this and complaining about this while in their expensive self-driving vehicle at an expensive lake house nearby, ostensibly a billionaire family. And so it's like the family, I think, at the end of the day, is doing fine. And his own internalized feelings of um, being less than, I just, after a while, it started to feel really grating considering the position of privilege he then worked himself into being. Like, I understand that as you're kind of coming out of a position of I wouldn't even say it was poverty based on the sound of it from the book, that that can be hard to let go of, and that there are financial discrepancies between couples and that can be a challenge in and of itself. Sorry, my camera was shaking. um, at a certain point you've committed to the relationship and work through that in therapy. I don't know, like it just he started to feel really whiny. And um again, in the context of the setting, it was like, dude, shut up. um I don't know, it just didn't, it lacked the nuance that I think that topic warrants. Yeah, and so I think that some of the kind of plot holes of the whole thing and the issues I had with the main character really just obscured the message behind the book, so that one just really didn't work for me. Um, Next one, kind of continuing my extreme horror splatterpunk journey, I read Gone to See the River Ran by Christopher Triana, which is also on a lot of those similar lists of like most disturbing books I've ever read. And it's about a woman who's corresponding with a serial killer who's in prison, and he asks her to do a favor for her or for him, and she agrees and ends up taking her disabled sister with her on this errand, which is kind of in the middle of the woods. And during this, their kind of journey, it slowly revealed some of the horrifying facts of her past. What happened with the sister? They also had a brother who's not present on the page, and you kind of just are brought to terms with what the main character had done in her life. Some really disturbing things uh, that were really uncomfortable to read. Uh, yeah, I mean, it just deals with some really heavy topics. It is stressful. It is I don't know. Again, it's just one of those books that like I think given the nature of it, it's hard to recommend something that's that extreme. Um, and so that was Gone to See the Riverman. And then next up, uh, I read A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I listened to the audiobook, and this is about a young girl, and it's kind of a is she possessed by a demon, is she not possessed by a demon kind of story, very similar to The Exorcist. There are a lot of references to other possession stories, so a lot of the storytelling to me just felt really on the nose. I didn't feel stressed out. I didn't feel connected to any of the characters. The pacing felt really strange to me. Um, you really just, it's like in media res, you're like right in it, and it just made it really hard to connect. And I found myself by the end just feeling really disappointed, given how much people love it. And they're like, oh, it's such a psychological thriller and it's so twisty. And um, that just wasn't my experience. I think I just felt kind of annoyed by everybody. And through the experience of the girl, um, her exorcism is like televised, so there's reality TV element, which I actually think is kind of an interesting addition. But the multimedia aspect of it, I don't know. There are clips from um, later interviews in the main character's life, and yeah, I don't know. It just felt like it was made for, it's kind of like I don't know, it felt like the Scream equivalent of novels, which is ironic for me to say because I love Scream. um, where it's like really self-aware, but in a way for me personally it didn't work. The payoff just wasn't there. um, and then the last on my worst list for May was The Dream Hotel. And I read this for my book club, and it's about a world, it's kind of like a, I think it's set in present day, but a world where people can be policed based on their thoughts, or you receive a score that indicates like how likely you are to commit a crime, and then based on that, you can be detained and brought to this place called the Dream Hotel. And this one really just felt like it dragged. Um, I think everybody in my book club had kind of the same experience where, um, some of the concepts in the book about the prison system or having your dreams be policed or your thoughts, um, living under this microscope, some of those, and especially too because the main character is an immigrant. Like I think that they're, or the daughter of an immigrant, of immigrant parents, but a lot of interesting threads. It just felt like it could have been a short story. It could have been quite a lot shorter, um, and honed in such a way that like it felt a lot tighter and more impactful. And so that one was kind of a disappointment. But moving on to the best of May. First, I'm excited to talk about this one was Kin by Tayari Jones. It was the first book that I read by her, and it's about two girls who don't have present mothers for one reason or another, living in a town called Honeysuckle, Louisiana, and it's about how their lives, the how they grew up or lived together as children, group together, and then go their separate ways. One goes to college, and one and I don't want to give any spoilers, and then the other goes kind of on this journey to find her mother. So I just thought that this was a really poignant representation of the period of time in which it was set. And Louisiana, I mean, it's an experience I just don't know anything about. Um, and the friendship and the camaraderie between some of the characters was really moving. The ways that family members will step in when someone is no longer around to take care of, the children. It was beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have no notes. It just as a novel was kind of perfect. So that was a really great read that I read in May. And then the next is Decomposition Book. And this one is about a girl who is taking a break, a little bit of a respite from college. She had something kind of big and dramatic go down with her best friend. and now she's staying at like her parents' second home. um, Her parents are recently divorced, and just kind of escaping everything, and she's drinking a lot, and um, also simultaneously there's the story she like stumbles into the woods and she finds a dead body, and near the dead body she also finds a journal from the girl who she finds. And so at the same time you're getting the story of what happened to the girl in the woods. um, and this one was, I think, really effective at being very stressful. You can feel the angst and the turmoil of the main character and how she struggles with her mental health, in the wake of a real trauma, on a college campus, which I think, again, is very topical. And I think the prose at times, I would have personally probably made some edits, but for the most part, I was really invested in the story and the characters. Um, and sometimes I struggle with a dual perspective, but I was invested in the kind of like lost in the woods story of the girl, the dead body. And yeah, so I really enjoyed that. Um, that was Decomposition Book. And then next, I listened to the audiobook of Fame Sick by Lena Dunham. And I watched Girls, like so many. Um, and just like had such a strong emotional connection, and so I was excited to see this come out. And it really was such an intimate portrait of her life, pre-Girls and then post up until now. And I think so much time has passed since a lot of the internet controversies around her first memoir, that she really just has such a sober perspective. I mean, she's literally sober, on her life and how everything went down. And so I found that just to be really powerful and interesting and insightful. And she has a very kind of honest way of writing, and I just like felt her come through on the page a lot, and was really engrossed in her story and her experience, and found that really interesting. I think it's an interesting portrait of fame, and especially when you grow up. I mean, she was so young, when she got signed on for Girls, and so to see her relationships evolve, um, and her struggle with her mental health and her physical health as well, I thought was just really, really well done. So I quite enjoyed that. And then I finally, next up, read Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, which obviously has been on my radar. I have not read anything else from him, but I own My Heart is a Chainsaw, so I do want to read that at some point. And that it's a complex, it's, his writing, there's a lot of depth, um and I don't really know what to say about it, and I enjoyed it. There's like a historical aspect where there's a historian kind of looking back through her grandfather's journals, recounting the story, everything that happened with the Buffalo Hunter. And I think that these stories are just really important, indigenous experiences, and how uh, like indigenous people have been treated by colonizers and white people, in religious communities as well. The grandfather, I think, was like a pastor or something. I don't quite remember. There's actually a lot of back and forth about like, oh, people keep calling me father, but that's not correct. So I thought that that was really well done. And then the two others are kind of like they're on my best, list, but they're more middle of the road for me. And that's Japanese Gothic, also by Kylie Lee Baker. And this is a dual perspective as well that follows a man who is taking a break from college after doing something potentially bad. And then also, so he's taking a break and he's visiting his dad in Japan. Um, and then you also get the perspective of a samurai who lived in the same house that the college student, is now in. Um, and so it kind of follows them as they unravel the mysteries of of their lives and how they're able to communicate with each other. And there were some elements of the like how they communicate that I it fell apart a little bit for me logically. But I had a fun time, and I think the setting was fun. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't my favorite, but it was an entertaining enough read, and I think kind of the disorienting quality of it was enough to keep me invested. Um, so that was that, and then the last for May was Hemlock and Silver, also by T. Kingfisher, which I picked up because I had enjoyed Wolfworm so much. And that's kind of a retelling of Snow White, and I didn't enjoy this one as much as Wolfworm. I found the writing style to be kind of difficult. The main character I didn't like as much. I will say that I like that her main characters in both of the books that I read are, older women or women who are not, these little waifs that are often depicted in a lot of fantasy these days. And so I enjoyed it. I think that retellings of classic stories are really hit or miss. It's hard to do, but I thought she did a good job. And so that wrapped up the 12 books that I read in May. We are in the home stretch now, on to June. I read 10 books. So this list is a little bit shorter, but there are some books that I had big feelings about. So first on my worst list is one that should be no surprise, and that's Shy Girl by Mia Ballard. And that is a novel that is just rife with controversy. It was pulled from publishing for being written by AI, and you can tell, and the formatting is terrible. And if you don't know what it's about, which I'm sure most people do, it's about a girl, Gia, who is struggling financially, and so she signs up for a sugar dating website and gets hired by a man who wants to pay her to be his dog. And it's about her descent into madness and violence and revenge and you know female rage. And I think it's just indicative of kind of the stage of publishing we're in, where everybody wants to publish a book that's going to sell, and right now female rage is the thing. And it's bleak. um but that's all I'm going to say about that, because I talked about it on my TikTok and in my last video. And then next, I read Bone of My Bone by Joanna Van Veen, and it was my first book by her. So I was pretty excited to read this one and found myself pretty disappointed. Again, I had a lot of the same issues that I had with Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, which I talked about earlier, where it's just like it's a religious setting and I just don't care. There's a nun and a runaway girl, and they have this very fast relationship that starts up, and they're trying to bring a skull back to it. Anyway, like it just I wasn't wowed by the writing. I didn't connect to the characters or the setting, and so it just was not really going to be a win for me, unfortunately. I would still be interested in reading Blood on Her Tongue, but that is not a priority item right now. And then next I read A Good Person by Kristen King, and that is one that I talked about in my June reading wrap up by Kristen King. I was aware of it because it has the same cover as He Birthed Upon It. And so some people, I think it was Frankie's Bookshelf, has done some videos like comparing, these two books have the same cover. How are they similar or dissimilar? And I just, another female rage story that lacked the depth I wanted. It's an easy read, felt like a beach read more than anything else when I wanted it to be more. So yeah, we're just going through these because I already have a June reading wrap up where I talk about all of these books a little bit more in depth. Same with The Caretaker by Marcus Cleaver. I just don't think he's the right writer for me. I read We Used to Live Here, and I just thought I didn't like it. I don't know. And then last on the worst list was the book club book that my book club read for June, and that was The Girl with a Thousand Faces. And this one's a real bummer. It was the book that I had pitched, and no one. It didn't really resonate with anybody in the book club. It also follows kind of a dual um, perspective. There's a woman who's a ghost talker, and she's in her 50s, which I love that she's a little bit older. And then there's a woman um, living on an island and trying to escape occupied um, Hong Kong, and it's set in Kowloon Walled City, which I thought was a really interesting setting, and I really just wish that that had been focused in on more. I think that there are elements of ghosts and possession, but then there's also this long kind of meandering middle section that really took me out of the story, and um, there's just so much packed into not a very long novel that it felt a little bit messy. And I think it's trying to. One of the things that we talked about was on the back flap. It talks about how the writer is biracial and grew up like the school she went to was right outside of Kowloon Walled City, and both of her like sets of grandparents um, had lived through like the period of time where that was still around. And I think that's super interesting. And I really wish that they had leaned into, Kowloon and the implications of this kind of lawless space in history. Japan didn't want it, Great Britain didn't want, like, nobody really, and so it was policed by, like, kind of self-contained in a lot of ways. And it just was pulled in too many, maybe 1,000 directions. And so that one was definitely a bummer. But I did have a couple of wins in June, starting with Wretch, which I think is interesting because people on Goodreads don't really like it. And that's by Eric LaRocca. It's about a man whose husband dies, and then he goes kind of on this search. He's exposed on the internet to a group of people who um, help each other process their grief through imagery, trying to find their loved ones in images. And then he's introduced to this figure called Porcelain Ka, which can help you have a last moment with your loved one who has passed. So it's about this idea of like a reverse haunting, or if someone you love passes, not being able to let them go, not being able to let it rest. So it's a lot about grief. And I thought that the experience of reading it was enjoyable. I was definitely engrossed. And so yeah, I enjoyed it. Next up, I have Root Rot, and this is by Saskia Nislau, I think is her name. This is a strange little book about a group of, I think it's 9 cousins who are like summering at their grandfather's house. And it's there are mushrooms and eyes blinking in incorrect directions, and just a lot of strangeness. Family dynamics. I don't know. I couldn't describe it to you, basically. But I recommend. It's short. It's sweet. It's weird. It was good for kind of spring, early summer. And then the next couple I read Hungerstone finally, which is a retelling of Carmilla. It was kind of the OG vampire story, and that was a lot of fun. And I read, I'm not gonna really talk about this one, but the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is basically like the yoga philosophy. What part of the yoga philosophy it describes the 8 limbs of yoga. It's really a lot to get into, um, so I'm not going to go into it further than that. And last but not least, I read The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This is currently on my best of June, and I think that's because I enjoyed, for how long it is, I did enjoy it. I have some criticisms, I have some things that didn't resonate. But it was interesting. I like fantasy. It was a nice way to shake things up. It kind of got me out of a little bit of a reading slump. Um, so I gotta give it its flowers for that. So yeah, I just kind of flew through June because I have a whole video dedicated to all 10 books that I read. And I am starting to get peckish. It's late lunchtime. I also am just needing to shake things up with this. The air quality is driving me nuts. Yeah, if you've read any of those, let me know. I'm currently in a little bit of a reading slump again, so anything to get me out of that, let me know in the comments. But thank you so much for being here, and I'll come soon with another update.